I'm Pastor Horton. Welcome to this week's interview where we're joined by Miss Kate Massey. Welcome to the podcast and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit before about your testimony. If you don't mind sharing that with everybody, that'd be amazing.
My testimony is kind of those that you hear all the time. I grew up in a Christian home. I had phenomenal parents. We were at church anytime the doors were open, but I really started having trials early in my life. And they range from anything from bullying to sexual abuse, struggling with suicide, all these different things. And a lot of them were compacted on top of each other. And at the time, I couldn't see it. But there were times that I wasn't living a godly lifestyle. I never stopped believing in God, but there were times that I would pull away. And unfortunately, sometimes it was because of Christians who, like, when I was bullied, it was at a Christian school. And so I was like, if this is what a Christian is, I want no part of it. And that was hard for me because it didn't reconcile with what I knew of God at that time. But just through the different journeys, God has led me into counseling, and I know that this is the purpose that God has for me. Just the way that I'm able to connect with the clients. And part of that is seeing how those traumas that I went through, yes, they were challenging, but without going through them, I wouldn't be able to empathize with my clients the way that I can because I understand where they are.
Yeah. That's incredible. Thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
Um, and you're right. A lot of Christians do go through a lot of trials. I'm terribly sorry that any of that happened to you. Um, I've also throughout my life experienced bullying. I've experienced sexual assault. I've experienced suicidal ideation, those
Mhm.
kinds of things, and it is a struggle. Um, Not only when you're of faith, but when you're not of faith.
Mhm.
But I will say it hits differently when you are of faith. I know for a while it was my belief that, well, I'm a Christian, so I shouldn't struggle with this. And it like I'm obviously doing something wrong. I'm not worthy. And
Mhm.
that was kind of a prevailing thought for me. And I have to ask, did you have to deal with that kind of a thing? And if so, how did you work past that?
So I did. And I will say that as a trauma counselor, one thing that I have noticed with the different people that I have counseled is that when someone goes through trauma, it really affects your identity, your self-esteem, every single aspect of you, is your self-worth, everything. But what's amazing is as Christians, we have a unique opportunity because we have the Bible. So I might not feel a certain way because of what I've been through, but we have the truth, which is God's word, and we are supposed to stand on that, right? So as Christians, should I be believing what the world or what those bullies had said about me? Or do I turn to God and listen to what he says about me? Okay, so people might have bullied me. Well, his word says that I'm more precious than rubies. Should I be taking on that instead of whatever title is being thrown at me by the world? And so many times we don't do that. But when we start to understand our identity in Christ and our worth in Christ and our authority, that's when things start to shift.
Absolutely. Uh, One of the things I thought of as you were saying that is, not to date this too much, but it's being recorded on a Sunday. And one of the songs that we sang at church very recently was Christ is my firm foundation.
Mhm.
And so to have the world saying something about you, but then knowing that Christ is the rock that I stand on, that I build my house on, I don't have to accept what the world calls me.
Mhm.
And I've got friends who often struggle with mental health, and often I'll say, you are beautifully, wonderfully, and specifically made by God to be
Mhm.
you. So, I mean, it's not the same as just saying, oh, well, don't be sad to a sad person. That doesn't
Right.
help. But it's saying, hey, I understand that you're sad, but I want you to remember that you're valuable, that you're
Hmm.
worthy, and all of those things.
Yeah. And in counseling, we talk about following the evidence, right?
Hmm.
We have a whole book full of evidence. And yet, a lot of times we're not looking at that book for the evidence. We're looking at places that are giving false testimonies, false descriptions of us, and we're holding on to that. Yet we have the opportunity to look at something that says the truth about us, that a lot of times it breaks down every time what the earth is saying about you.
Absolutely. I mean, so often the Bible specifically goes against everything that the world is saying.
Hmm.
Jesus was not only, I mean, he was crucified because of blasphemy. He said that he was
Hmm.
God, and
Yeah.
he was God, is God, and for that, he was crucified. But part of the thing that made people get so upset at him was he said, hey, all of those things that you're doing in the world, stop, because they're
Hmm.
not right to do. And people hated that.
Yep.
Um, I'd like to say, with your being a trauma counselor, and you mentioned, and I'm going back to part of your testimony, you said that your own life experience, your lived experience with trauma, drew you to be a trauma counselor. I am going to pull up a verse out of my personal favorite book of the Bible, which is Ephesians. And it's in Ephesians 4, and it is. Um, okay, it's Ephesians 4:28. And it says, anyone who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must work, doing something useful with their own hands, that they may have something to share with those in need. Now, I'm not going to say that you were stealing, because you weren't,
Hmm.
but that verse doesn't only apply to stealing, it applies to lived experience, taking that experience in whatever you're doing and using it for the benefit of others. So, for instance, I've given talks to some of the youth groups that I help run about suicide awareness and what to do when you start having those thoughts and ideations. Or I've written a book, and that is entirely about my own experience so that people can go out, they can read this, and they can learn from my mistakes.
Hmm.
And to see that you are doing exactly what that verse is talking about is just incredible, because that verse kind of fell into my lap just a couple of days ago. And
Hmm.
here you are talking to me about doing that exact thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like when I was struggling with suicide ideation and stuff like that, my I was very good at hiding it.
Hmm.
Um, I had one of my best friends who recently read my book. She was like, I haven't gotten through the whole thing because I got to the part where you mentioned that you were suicidal and I didn't know. And we've been friends for over 20 years. And she was like, how did I not know that you struggled with this? And I was like, because I hid it. I was very good at hiding it. And with that, my parents knew something was off, but they didn't know what exactly. So they sent me to counseling, but it was so interesting. The counseling experiences that I had weren't that great. I would go a few times. One of them, I remember going in for the intake, and I walked out and I looked at my mom and I was like, I am never coming back here again, just point blank. Um, and looking at it now as a counselor, there were things that were said in those sessions that were not how counseling sessions are supposed to go. But there were people who didn't understand where I was coming from. They'd never struggled with the type of stuff that I had struggled with. And I wasn't even telling them the deepest, darkest parts at that point. And so I was sitting there going, how can you help me if you don't even understand where I am? You might have textbook knowledge, but that's completely different than being there yourself, of going through self-harm or whatever it may be. If you haven't experienced that, there's a different level when you have experienced that where you can connect with those clients.
Yeah. I had um I had a similar thing happen where I dealt with those feelings for a couple of years, probably
Mhm.
close to 5, maybe more. It's hard to say. My memory isn't so good during that time. Shocker. Um, but I had struggled for a couple of years at least with those feelings. And when I was in the military, and I've told a few people this, I still struggled with them, especially after the assault that happened in boot camp. That I then went off to my training command, just kind of spiraled. And it came to a head when one day I was at my job doing work, just a side thing, and I looked over at a friend and I made some kind of a joke. And to me, it was haha funny. And he looked at me, he didn't laugh, he just looked at me and went, "Are you okay?" And I, of course, gave the answer of, "Oh, yeah, I'm fine, I'm only joking." And he said, "I've been where you're at. I know that you're not okay. I'm taking you to the hospital." Because he
Mhm.
was worried about me. And I tried fighting it like a fool, and he said, "No, I'm not taking no for an answer. You're coming with me whether you like it or not." And so I went with him, but that ultimately is what got me into getting help that I needed. Other people for years didn't know.
Mhm.
They didn't realize that I had anything wrong. I was a little bit more introverted, a little less social than I had been in the past, and just a little more reserved. Didn't show too many emotions, but this guy saw me and said, "Hey, I've dealt with that before. I know those signs. You're
Mhm.
dealing with something." And that's what got me the help. So empathy and lived experience is a real requirement for a lot of help.
Yeah, and it's amazing because like you were saying, like I can tell better. I mean, not all the time, right?
Mhm.
But a lot of times I can tell when people are trying to cover up those things because I have been there. And so just like your friend who was like, "Okay, that's not necessarily a joke. You're not kidding there." You have more authority to stand there. And as someone who's been through it, I do have authority. But also looking at it from the point of discipleship. I've been through that. I've
Mhm.
been through that trial. So if I can take your hand and guide you, there's a difference in someone who has been on that journey than someone who hasn't, right? If you're going to go on a hike and it's not, a nice trail that's always been there, and it's one of the more wilderness hikes, you're not going to take someone who's never been on that hike before
No,
because they're not going to be able to guide you to where you need to go. And so it
exactly.
helps to be able to guide someone from the perspective of having been there.
Absolutely. It's one of those things where like you have to know what you're doing if you're actually going to help this person. But
Mhm.
even if you don't know what you're doing, you've never been through that, you can at least guide them to somebody who does.
Yeah.
So there are plenty of things that I can't help with. I can't help somebody change the brakes on their car, but I think I know somebody who can. And a
Yep.
similar kind of thing where I've lived this, I would ask, "Hey, if you're dealing with this or you know somebody who's dealing with this, please feel free to send them my way." Because the last thing that I want is to hear later on that you or somebody else was struggling and you didn't come to me. Because if I can at least help in any way, I want to help you.
Yeah.
Uh, One of the other things that I found, especially with this ministry that I've done, is all of those things that I felt disqualified me, that I was saying made me feel like I wasn't proper to have as a Christian.
Mhm.
All of those things, they actually qualified me instead of disqualifying me. And I had it explained to me this way. If somebody walked up to you, if a pastor walked up to you and said, "Hey, I've been to seminary, I've read the entire Bible front to back, and I understand a lot of stuff, but I have never been through a trial in my life," would you follow that pastor?
Hmm.
Personally, while I think that pastor may have good information, I think they'd probably make a better theologian than a pastor. Because theologians, they study the Bible, they explain the Bible, they teach the Bible. Pastors lead people in the Bible.
Hmm.
And for that, you have to have that lived experience. So I would rather somebody who has struggled with addiction, with pain, with suffering, with trials all through their life. I would prefer that because I know they have found faith through fire.
Hmm. Well, and that's when we truly get refined, is when we do face those trials. And, I've had people ask me, they're like, oh, would you, if you could go back and change like the things that you've been through or whatever, would you change it? And I wouldn't. There's nothing like, did I make bad decisions? 100%. Did things happen to me that I wish never had happened? Yes. But I still would not change them because without those things, I don't believe that I would be where God has me right now. And I wouldn't be able to connect with my clients the way that I can. And so, a lot of times, even though there are painful things, it's looking at it from a different perspective of, okay, but how did you grow from that? How did God use that in your life to make you better?
Exactly. And I had that same thought even last night. I sat there about to go to sleep and I said, would I do anything in my life differently if I could go back in time? Because I just have random thoughts pop into my head. Like, would I do something differently? And I thought about it and I said, you know what? For that exact same reason, God is using all of the things that went poorly in my life for the glory of his kingdom.
Mhm.
I mean, I think of I was bullied a lot as a kid. I was one of the nerdy, weird kids who didn't like doing anything athletic. I liked sitting down, reading, and, you know, so I got picked on a lot. And one of the things that I had happen was my great grandma and great aunt, which are absolutely wonderful people. They signed me up for a storytelling summer camp. And I ended up going for over a decade just because it was fun, enjoyable, and I didn't realize, but it taught me public speaking, which in speech class I always hated. But then I kind of realized, hey, I'm kind of getting good at this. And it's because of those experiences that they gave me because of the negativity in my life. And they ended up giving me that. And now I'm more than comfortable sitting in front of an audience preaching. I don't think without storytelling I would be able to do that, which is so crazy to think that it started way back here when I was, what, 6 years old? And now I'm 21 years old and I'm reaping the benefits of that pain. It's insane to me.
Yeah, and it's just amazing. Like one thing, so I mentioned that I wrote a book, and in it, one thing that God really had me do is as I talk through each trauma, he has me mention where he was or where his hand was working in that situation. Because a lot of times we can let what the enemy did to try and tear us down or what other people did to us, we allow that to really take the like lead there. But in reality, God was doing something in that situation too. He might not have caused your pain, but he allowed it to happen. And if he allows it to happen, there's a reason for it. And if we can just shift our perspective to seeing, okay, where were you working in that situation? Because, like you said, he was building blocks for you that you were going to build a wall with later in your life to get to where you needed to go. You're building that bridge, you're doing what you need to do. Would you be in the same place you are now if you hadn't gone through that? And a
Oh,
lot of times the answer is no.
yeah. I'll I'll end off on this because we are running short on time. but I was told um, a story about a man walking on a beach with God. And when he died, he looked back on this beach and he saw two sets of footprints. And at some places, he saw one set, and those were the places where he struggled the most. And he looked at God and he said, God, where were you? I was walking alone during those hard times. And God looked at him and said, my son, that's where I was carrying you.
Hmm.
So it really is that even during the hard times, when we can't walk with God, He will carry us through those times.
Hmm.
So, to end off, you mentioned that you have a book. What is it? Where can we find it? Give me all the details.
Okay, I actually have one with me.
Oh,
It's Purpose
wonderful.
in the Pain. And you can find it on Amazon. You can find it at Barnes and Noble, anywhere that sells books, Walmart. Um, I just had the audiobook released a few weeks ago. So that's an option too. But I really encourage people to read it, not because I wrote it, but because I really do feel like it was a message that God gave me for people. And I feel like if you read this book, he will meet you in the pages and he will help you to gain a better understanding or even help you heal from those things. And it's amazing to see how he can work through different things. This book was hard for me to write because of a lot of the things that, I mean, I mentioned before, one of my best friends had no idea I struggled with suicide. So having conversations like that with who knows who's going to read the book, it was challenging, but at the same time, God has a story to tell. And our testimonies is where, like, that's where other people can see where God's working.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. To everybody out there who may be listening, if you would like to find that book, I will have links down in the description of this. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute blast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And to everybody out there, I hope that this has inspired you. Please remember to share this with somebody, just anybody who you may feel called to share this with. I hope that you have a wonderful week, and God bless.